Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto, where we come to transform ourselves and each other and the world. It is so good to see you this morning. Let's take a moment to unmute and be able to hear each other's voices as we say good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning.
Happy Sunday.
Praise love this
Good
moment.
morning.
To hear your voices.
Hi,
Good
everybody.
afternoon.
Good morning and good afternoon if that's where you are. Maybe it's the middle of the night for you, depending. Service by following the link in the chat. And there are numerous announcements there of the events coming up, including 2 important community meetings this week. So don't miss out. Make sure to have a look there. And now, let us begin our service. I was mute. There we go. Should I go? As I light the chalice, Vivi will say our chalice words in German, and then Brooke will say them in English. Light your chalice along with us if you like. Can we hear Vivi? I'm not seeing Vivi's spotlight there, so can we hear her? There we go.
Diese Worte verdanken wir UUCPA Jean Bosco, der Leiter des Assemblée des Chrétiens Unitariens du Burundi, die Unitarische Kirche Burundi. Willkommen in dieser heiligen Zeit. Wir nehmen Menschen die Not an, die in ihr Leben tritt. Wir entzünden diese Kerze im Bewusstsein, dass unsere Natur viel Gutes bereithält, wenngleich heftige Stürme uns ohne klaren Grund beuteln, Feuer all unsere Besitztümer verzehrt und wir hilfloser als je davor zurückbleiben. Jener Moment der Verzweiflung trennt uns von unseren Freunden, unseren Kollegen, unserer Gemeinde und sogar von unseren Familien, da wir ihre Erwartungen nicht erfüllen können. In dieser Zeit fluchen wir, anstatt zu segnen. In dieser Zeit verurteilen wir, anstatt zuzuhören. In dieser Zeit der Verzweiflung isolieren wir uns, anstatt unsere Gedanken und Gefühle auszudrücken. Möge dieser Leuchter uns Halt geben, obwohl der Sturm uns übel mitgespielt hat, obwohl das Feuer über uns gekommen ist. Möge er uns zusammenführen. Möge dieser Leuchter ein Sinnbild der Einheit, der Hoffnung und des Segens sein.
These words are offered by Ndihokubwayo Jean Bosco, leader of the Assemblée des Chrétiens Unitariens du Burundi, Unitarian Church of Burundi. Welcome into this holy time. How do people accept adversity that comes upon our lives? We light this chalice, conscious that our nature expects much good to happen, yet this does not prevent strong winds from striking us without clear cause. Fire falls upon our possessions and consumes everything, and we find ourselves more hopeless than ever. That moment of despair separates us from our friends, our employees, our community, even our families, because we cannot meet their expectations. It is the time when we curse instead of offering blessing. And at the same time, we judge instead of listen. In the time of despair, we isolate ourselves instead of expressing our thoughts and feelings. May this chalice sustain us through though the wind has struck us hard, though fire has fallen on us. May it bring us together. May this chalice be a symbol of unity, hope, and blessing. Amen.
With our centering words each week, we draw on the many sources of our living tradition. Today's words are from Egbert Ethelred Brown, a Jamaican-born U.S. American who lived from 1875 to 1956. Why then am I a Unitarian minister? Because I could not be enchained by the creeds and traditions of the Orthodox churches, which I had long since intellectually and ethically outgrown. I wished freedom, freedom to be my own self, to express myself as myself. And I believed then, as I believe now, that a minister of religion must first of all be absolutely loyal to the truth. As we follow the sound of the bell into silence, let us become centered and fully present in this place together. Please join in as Bruce leads us in singing Faith of the Larger Liberty.
shalt give our loyalty commanding. Heroes of faith in every age, far-seeing, self-denying, broad and increasing heritage, monarch and creed defying, faith of the free in thy dear name, the costly heritage we claim, their living and their dying. Faith for the people everywhere, whatever their oppression, of all who make the world more fair, living their faith's confession. Faith of the free, whate'er our plight, thy law, thy liberty, thy light shall be our blessed possession.
I want to hear the story of the Pool of Enchantment.
Oh yes, the story from the Ramayana. I'll act out the part of King Yudhisthira.
The king, or rather the queen, and her siblings were chasing a deer that had stolen the wood needed to start a Brahmin's sacred fire. After chasing the deer for a long time, they sat down under a tree, so thirsty they couldn't go on.
If we don't find water soon, we'll die. Nakula, climb this tree to look for water.
There's water over there.
Go get some water and bring it back to us.
Nakula soon found a pool of clear water. A crane stood at the far edge of the pool. Water, I'm so thirsty. Do not drink, O Prince, until you answer my questions. Nakula was thirsty, so he ignored the voice. He drank the cool water, and in a few moments lay dead beside the pool.
Where is Nakula? Sahadeva, you'll have to go and bring us some water.
On my way. Nakula, dead. I'm so thirsty. I'll drink before I find out what killed him. Do not drink, O Prince, until you have answered my questions. But Sahadeva had already drunk from the water and also lay dead beside the pool.
Arjuna, find our siblings and bring us water. I'll take my bow and arrows just in case. Oh, my two siblings dead. I'll find out who or what killed them. But first, I'm so thirsty.
Do not drink, O Prince, until you have answered my questions.
Who are you? Come out and fight with me.
Do not drink, O Prince. Soon Arjuna too lay dead beside the pool.
Bhima, go find our siblings, then bring back water to me.
Seeing their siblings, Bhima wondered what evil demon had killed them. Do not drink, O Prince, until you have answered my questions. When the queen realized that her siblings were not going to return, she went to the pool herself.
This must be the work of some evil spirit. But I am so thirsty, I will drink first.
Do not drink, O Queen, until you have answered my questions. They shouldn't have drunk the water.
Who's that strange voice that speaks?
We'll have to wait until next week to find out.
our beautiful centering words, and now we turn our thoughts to the important events of our lives which we wish this community to share. If you have a joy or sorrow you would like me to speak this morning, please send it to the email address joyconcern@uucpa.org or post it in the chat box provided by Zoom for me to share aloud with our whole community. I have received a joy from Armin Schwartz, who shares that his grandson, Dominic Landon, graduated from high school this week in Albuquerque. He plans to be an Blessed be. Please join in as Bruce leads us in singing Blue Boat Home.
Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the light of the heavens in a beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home.
I've been aware of my whiteness for as long as I can remember. As a young child, I spent a few years living in Brazil. I clearly remember being surrounded by a circle of white expats who, along with me, were very different from the Brazilians who vastly outnumbered us. I felt exotic. I was noticed everywhere I went. I never felt unsafe, just very, very different from the majority of the people around me. Fast forward a few years to my next childhood home in Hawaii. Again, I was the exotic one. There weren't a whole lot of haoles, as I was called, at my public elementary school. The two kids who were considered locals actually beat me up on Fridays, which they called Kill Haole Day. I escaped the constant hazing by going to a private school that was about half people of Asian descent and half people of European descent, with a few Pacific Islanders and Black people. Again, I was not in the majority, but at least I was physically safe. Despite my constant awareness of my race, I was surprised when I got to college and was told about white skin privilege. How could that apply to me when I had rarely lived in a place that was majority white and I had suffered from being white? A few years later, I was in Los Angeles during the time of what were known as the Rodney King riots. I was working in a law office in Koreatown, and we all watched out the windows as our local lunch spots went up in flames. When Rodney King himself went on TV and said, "Can we all get along?" it shook me up a bit. I remember thinking that if we could all get along, we would already be doing that, and there wouldn't be any fighting. I began to realize that there was going to have to be more open conflict before we could come together and live in peace. Life went on. I moved to the East Coast and then back out here to California. I believed I was a good liberal person. I even worked for the ACLU. I was in favor of school and residential integration, but I was still avoiding conflict. And then the election of 2016 happened. I was shocked. Conflict had found me. I urgently needed to move from feeling like I was a good liberal to actually understanding what had brought our country to elect a president who exhibited such anger toward and fear of women and non-white people, and what had moved some members of my family to vote for this person. I started reading and talking with folks and listening to podcasts and watching videos and participating in the virtual Beloved Conversations program through Meadville Lombard. I feel like all of this thinking and listening and talking has caused layers of false assumptions and half-truths that I've accumulated fall away from me like the skin of an onion. And I'm stirred up inside, just like the glitter jars we give kids for meditation, those glass jars filled with liquid and sparkly glitter that swirl around when you shake them. Some days, the causes and effects of systemic racism are all clear to me, and other days, my mind is a jumble. I've come to accept that this journey isn't smooth or linear, and that I will mess up a lot. This journey has helped me understand that though I've been a minority in some of the places I've lived, I've always been in the cultural majority. I know that the land we live on is stolen, and the labor that created wealth out of it was also stolen. Those words feel charged when I say them out loud, but they're objectively true. They're full of conflict, and they're also true. At the same time, I still need a home. We all need a home. The UU Beloved Conversation Design team member, Sarah Osborne, says, "We all deserve a home. Us too, me too." So how do I live without fear or guilt and in right relationship in this place with others who have also benefited from the historical theft, and also with those who were stolen from? I am still working on that, and I will be working on that for the rest of my life. And I'm glad to be working on it along with all of you. I believe we'll only figure out how to do this if we work on it together.
Our first reading is from How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. What if anti-racists constantly self-critiqued our own ideas? What if we blamed our ideologies and methods, studied our ideologies and methods, refined our ideologies and methods again and again until they worked? When will we finally stop the insanity of doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result? Self-critique allows change. Changing shows flexibility. Anti-racist power must be flexible to match the flexibility of racist power. As we critique the privilege and inaction of racist power, we show our privilege and inaction by critiquing every effective strategy, ultimately justifying our inaction on the comfortable seat of privilege. Anything but flexible. We are too often bound by ideologies that are bound by failed strategies of racial change. What if we assess the methods and leaders and organizations by their results of policy change and equity? What if strategies and policy solutions stemmed not from ideologies, but from problems?
Our second reading is from the Next American Revolution, Sustainable Activism in the 21st Century by Grace Lee Boggs. History is not the past, it is the stories we tell about the past. How we tell these stories, triumphantly or self-critically, metaphysically or dialectically, has a lot to do with whether we cut short or advance our evolution as human beings. As Jimmy Boggs used to remind us, revolutions are made out of love for people and for place. He often talked about loving America enough to change it. I love this country, he used to say, not only because my ancestors' blood is in the soil, but because of what I believe it can become. Love isn't just something you feel, and love isn't about what we did yesterday. It's about what we do today and tomorrow and the day after. I'll now switch to a reflection. Sorry. I'd like to think of myself as valuing the inherent worth and dignity of every person, upholding justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and not having a racist bone in my body. Yet I've been struck a number of times in my life by how ignorant I can be of my own protected safe space and the degree to which it cocoons me from the true awareness of what it feels like to be most people on this earth without so safe, supportive, comforting, and confident-making surroundings. After majoring in history and abhorring man's inhumanity to man throughout the ages, I determined never to generalize about another human until I knew that person. Then, walking home from graduate school late one night, I realized I felt a little frightened walking past a number of Black men and walked a little faster, staring fiercely straight ahead. So much for not having a shred of racism in my bones. When I met my to-be husband, Shashi, at the UU in Dallas, I noticed those first meeting him would ask if he were with the university. He had been born in Uganda to parents of Indian origin and just didn't look like Dallas, where the general population was either Black or white. He had gotten 2 physics and a law degree from the University of London, but could not get one job interview from the 200 letters he sent solicitors firms. So he came to the US seeking a meritocracy, which he felt he found. I commented on his ability to put anyone he newly met warmly at ease, to which he said, I had to learn to. Why? Because in the world, this, touching my white arm, is worth more than this, touching his dark brown arm. We moved to California, knowing it would be more comfortable to live as a mixed race couple, including for our half-half children, as he called them. We named our first child a daughter, Asha, meaning hope in Shashi's native Gujarati, idealizing her as the hope for the future. When we moved to a charming village west of London for 3 years with his HP job, the doctor in our local surgery asked if Shashi were going to run the village mom and pop store. Not a reassuring introduction to village life for my husband with his then 4 degrees, having picked up a Stanford MBA. Our son Ravi was born in England. Anytime we went through customs for a family vacation, I'd put Ravi, the youngest and therefore palest skinned child, into Shashi's arms, hoping Shash would come through the line relatively unscathed quickly. Back in the US, my husband, then an American citizen, found it only got worse after 9/11. It could take him hours to get through customs, traveling 3 weeks out of 4 globally for HP. I saw how easy it was for our country to backslide in time of crisis, so like the internment of Americans of Japanese descent after Pearl Harbor. Those experiences paled before the last 5 years in the US. He who had the microphone and Twitter account unleashed the ugly underbelly remnant of ignominious centuries of slavery's abomination. For centuries, we've written laws that are not upheld, granted hardscrabble land, taken away the next year, and precluded slave descendants from having good books and well-built schools with enough food on the table to nourish mind and soul. The majority white leadership cannot truly understand what it feels like and how deeply it wounds anyone on the other end of the color spectrum. So we must proactively listen carefully to what they say is needed and bend that moral arc of the universe through purposeful effort, naming racism for what it is, calling it out and overturning it. I don't think stating fair treatment for each person is sufficient to balance the ingrained imbalance of centuries. We have not ensured equally advantageous quality of life through the 1964 Civil Rights Act or the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Righteous words, starting our country on a hoped-for new footing for all. The deeply ingrained racism in our national psyche takes active practice today to rid ourselves of it. We UUs once evolved to add the seventh principle to highlight environmental awareness and activism. Let's add an eighth principle for dismantling racism, holding ourselves accountable by naming it, reminding us to proactively work to uncover its camouflaging cloth, understanding more deeply its impact, to know how to heal its wounds for our future spiritual wholeness. And in this journey, let us relish the richly rewarding experience of a diverse, multicultural, beloved community with creative expression of individual and community strengths, the whole so much greater and more thrilling than the sum of its parts.
Thank you so much to these participants in our Dismantling White Supremacy group and in the UUA's Beloved Conversations virtual group for leading us today. We create this space together, not out of wood and glass, nor even out of electricity and binary signals, but out of our presence. Wherever we are today, we have chosen to be together, hoping that together we can do so much more to make our lives into all that we dream of and make our world into the one we hope to see. If we are moved by gratitude to each other, we may choose to support with whatever financial resources we can this community that we are creating and that is creating us. The offering will now be given and received. The order of service gives a QR code and link and also information on using text to give via Give Lively. Such beautiful music from Chris Yenny this morning. Chris is part of our living tradition in a very concrete way. She grew up in this congregation. Lovely to have her beautiful cello. I want to share again the quote that Karen spoke for us as our centering words this morning. Such a guide to us as members of a living tradition, a tradition that continues to grow and change like a living thing. I wished freedom, freedom to be my own self, to express myself as myself. And I believed then, as I believe now, that a minister of religion must first of all be absolutely loyal to truth. That was Reverend Egbert Ethelred Brown speaking. And of course, that loyalty to truth is not only for the ministers of a church, but for all its members, for all who seek to live a life of meaning and morality. I love the fact that he holds up for us truth as a pole star. That freedom to be our own selves, such as he sought and found in the Unitarian Church, is possible only when we can be loyal to truth as we perceive it. And truth is an interesting star. Well, it's like any guiding star, I guess, in that it may lead to staying on course. It may tell us, you're heading in the right direction, just carry on doing that. Or it may tell us, you're heading over here and I'm here. This is the truth. This is where you need to go. And so it leads us to change. By anchoring ourselves to truth as a faith tradition, we say that truth is more important than tradition or than innovation, that neither the way things were nor some new plan is the way to go unless it's guided by truth. That's how we know whether this is the moment to change or to stay the same. We are in a tradition that has changed many, many times, including in its foundational documents. The documents that we go back to say, again, who are we? To explain to the rest of the world what is important to us. In 1885, to give just one example, James Freeman Clarke, a Unitarian minister, summarized the New Theology, as he called it, with 5 points that took hold as a statement of faith for all Unitarians. The fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, and the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. Then, some almost 100 years later, as the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America were merging, they approved 6 principles, which began to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship, and ended to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. That was in 1960, and the merger was official on May 12, 1961, exactly 60 years ago, last Wednesday. But those principles were soon revisited, just as Clarke's had been and others have been floated, used, and then left behind over our years. In a process that reached its conclusion in 1984, the new denomination, the newly merged Unitarian Universalist Association, debated, rewrote, voted and voted again, and reached the 7 principles we currently affirm and promote. The process began when women and some people of other genders chafed at the casually sexist language of man, men, and brotherhood that cropped up repeatedly in the 1960 version. You can read all of these 7 principles by following the links about us at our website, and I'll post them when I post this sermon on our website as well. So the principles rested there at 7, though the list of 5 sources that accompanied them was lengthened to 6 several years later. But they were adopted with full awareness that they were one stage of many, and that we would formally revisit them often, as we most recently did in 2015. In fact, the UUA bylaws dictate that we reconsider our statement of principles at least once every 15 years. This is one of my favorite things about our tradition, that we have literally inscribed our commitment to reviewing our own most foundational words in the light of what we now understand to be true. Knowing that, as we say, revelation is not sealed. The truth continues to reveal itself to us. We continue to grow, we hope, in wisdom and understanding. And so we have to keep looking to that pole star and say, is this a time to keep going in the direction we're going? Is it a time to change something? The last time we considered the principles in 2015, we decided they're good the way they are. But we will reconsider them again by bylaws by 2030. As Warren Ross wrote in Unitarian Universalist World magazine in 2000, we would today have difficulty saying the statement about the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus by Clark, and all that, without embarrassment and lots of sickness, he's saying, S-I-C-ness. Yet the people who did say them were just as intelligent, as in tune with their times, and as committed to reason and free thinking as we are. In 2020, when everyone presumably will have perfect vision, he foresaw, our current principles and purposes may also be perceived to have inadequacies that demand radical rewriting. And therein lies our genius. It's a process that is rightly called renewal or regeneration, and that is what has not changed, and let us hope will remain unchanged 20 or even 100 years from now. Amen, Mr. Ross. Thank you for saying so eloquently what is in my heart. Now, the Reverend Egbert Ethelred Brown was from Jamaica and a passionate advocate of self-government for his country, which was still in his time a colony of the British Empire. He was raised Episcopalian, but found himself more and more at odds with the doctrine of his church. This may be a familiar experience to many of us. In his case, one of the things that really bothered him was the doctrine of the Trinity. He was deeply gratified to discover that his Unitarian theology was affirmed by the scholarship of centuries and that there was a Unitarian church in the United States. In a leap of faith, he moved himself and his family to a new country, coming to the United States so that he could study at Meadville Theological School and pursue ordination. No Black man had ever been ordained a Unitarian minister in the United States. Brown became the first, but he was told in no uncertain terms that no U.S. congregation would call a Black man to minister to them. He proposed to begin a new congregation in Harlem. The American Unitarian Association said, well, go right ahead. They even gave him some money, but they refused to allow him to affiliate with them, the AUA. I try to imagine his frame of mind when he received this news. And what must have been in his heart, in his sinews and bones and mind to go on to found Harlem Community Church anyway. It was a small Unitarian church, Unitarian in its theology, And as I said, the AUA gave him a little financial support now and then, but soon it dropped even that. When he founded the church, it was 1920, the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, that thrilling period that we now wisely recognize as a renaissance, not only for Harlem, but for the arts in the United States and the world. Music, art, literature, dance burst forth in a fountain of innovation and inspiration, and Harlem was at the center of it. Brown was there. His church was there. And Unitarianism as an institution could have been there, but declined to do so. To this day, there is no Unitarian Universalist Church in New York City north of 80th Street. It's not as if we are booming in New York either. In a city of over 8 million souls, fewer than 2,000 are members of a Unitarian Universalist church. I bring up this story, as I could bring up many others, not to wring our hands about things that can't be changed. The past is the past. And not, worse still, to wallow in guilt, as Grace Lee Boggs urges us to do. We look at the past in order to shape the future that we want. How we tell our stories, as she says, triumphantly or self-critically, has a lot to do with whether we cut short or advance our evolution as human beings. In other words, again, are we going to be guided by the truth? Are we going to look at our past stories and say, here's how they deviate from what we see as the truth now. Let us reorient ourselves. And as she went on to say, love isn't about what we did yesterday. It's about what we do today and tomorrow and the day after. So as a congregation in a wider denomination that is called to follow love and truth, we look to the past in order to follow those. In order to build the future that we want. As a contemporary Unitarian Universalist minister, Mark Morrison Reeds asks, can you imagine how we would be enriched today if there was a vibrant UU congregation in Harlem that had been around for almost 100 years? That can be our future. We can't go back and make it have been there for 100 years, but we can say, what do we want to do now? So that the people 100 years ago will say, well done, thank you. This is why we have the vibrant communities that we do. Reverend Morrison Reed is our most faithful chronicler of such attempts of people of color, especially African Americans like himself, to breach the walls of our tradition when they were guarded by those who saw whiteness as a core part of our identity. He notes numerous other lost opportunities, and I'll quote him here. In 1920, for example, that same fateful year when Reverend Brown decided he was going to start his church anyway. In 1920, 10-year-old Jeffrey Campbell discovered Universalism and on his own began attending First Universalist Society in Nashua, New Hampshire, bringing his little sister along. In 1929, Campbell enrolled in the theological school at St. Lawrence University, a Universalist seminary. 50 years later, Campbell told me, Morrison Reed, that when he was admitted to the seminary, the superintendent of the New York State Universalist Convention complained to the dean, John Murray Atwood, why are we wasting the denomination's money on a word I will not speak, but begins with N? Campbell graduated in 1935, but the Universalists could not find a congregation willing to settle him, nor in 1937 could the Unitarians. The same was true for Louis McGee when he approached the AUA in 1927, Harry V. Richardson in 1930, Eugene Sparrow in 1949, McGee again in 1956. The list goes on. And in my own time, as someone who's been a minister for only about 20 years, I can think of African American, Latino, Indigenous, and Asian ministers who found it hard to find a supportive congregation, who drifted away or found some other work while staying at the margins of our communities. I can think of many other lay members who came seeking a faith just like ours, but were met by subtle yet unmistakable messages that they didn't belong, that they couldn't possibly be interested in Unitarian Universalism because their background was Catholic, or because we were an upper middle class church, or because we don't worship the way their people do. The implication being that if there is a difference between us, the church as it is today, and these people who are coming in the door, well, the church isn't going to change to adapt to them, to adopt any of their ways. Even though that is exactly what our songs do, what our congregations do, what our ways do, that this is what we have always done at our best. Adopt the new truths brought to us by new people. Adapt our tradition accordingly. The way in one of our most beloved hymns, Blue Boat Home, that we've just sung together, Peter Meyer took a very old song that we know well, that we sing in a different way in our hymnals, and said, let's change it a little. Let's change the rhythm. Let's make it sound a little bit more like this 21st century. And he brought us something beautiful. Unitarian Universalism appeals to people of many, many circumstances, as our global chalice lighting reminds us whenever we use it. Today's words came from the Unitarians in Burundi. Others have come from South Africa, from the Netherlands, from Colombia, from all over the world, just as we share words and wisdom from many, many times. But racism, it's part of our culture. It's the water we swim in. And as Morrison Reed writes, it is our inheritance and controls us in ways we cannot imagine. However, simply calling them out, he says, offers little illumination. What we need is to understand, for understanding might help us make different choices today. And that understanding deepens when we turn from thinking of racism as a matter of attitude, of prejudice in the mind of the individual, to recognizing how an assumption that white is right is embedded in the systems and structures of our society. It doesn't always wear a white hood. It's very subtle. But if you're a person of color, oh, you know it when you come up against it. Well, systemic racism is another sermon, but some remedies for it are here right now, among us, within our congregation, within our wider community, and within our tradition. So I want to just mention each of those just briefly before I close. Within the congregation, at this moment, we have dismantling white supremacy. This is a learning space for white people. It's formally called White Folks Dismantling White Supremacy. And we call it that because it's so important for white folks to have that space to explore together. People of color are warmly welcome. Just advise that it's a place for white people to ask the elementary questions and process the new to us information that is probably old hat for people of color and often painful for them to revisit. I and the rest of the worship team will be working this year, and I'm sure for many years into the future, on decentering whiteness in our central activity, the heart of our ministry in the community, Sunday worship. And we do not have an organization yet, but I encourage and will happily help people make the connections if people of color within our congregation which wish to form a chapter of DRUM, Diverse Revolutionary UU Multicultural, Multiracial Ministries, which is the umbrella organization for people of color in UU congregations and organizations. That's our congregation. In the wider community, well, just this Saturday coming up on the 22nd, we have a marvelous opportunity. It's listed in your order of service. What does an anti-racist community look like? This is a conversation between Dr. Julie Lithcott-Hames and Reverend Coloma Smith, our neighbor right around the corner at University AME Church. Mark Morrison Reed asks us again and again to imagine the world that we might inhabit if we were guided by anti-racism. This Zoom conversation between Reverend Smith and Dr. Lithcott-Hames is a grand chance to be led toward that world. For people of color, I hope you will come and join your voices to theirs, as I know you're already doing. For white people, I hope you will listen to two of the intellectual leaders and social change leaders of our community, Reverend Smith and Dr. Lithcott-Hames, and also that you will listen to the people of color at UUCPA and be guided by their vision. It doesn't mean that we're going to agree with every single thing that these two fine people suggest, but to hear from them who have lived in this community as people of color for many years. What would it look like to you, for Palo Alto and of course its environs, to be an anti-racist community? What an opportunity to learn, to just listen and absorb and reflect and say, let's go there, let's follow them. And in Unitarian Universalism, we also have remedies for the racism, the white supremacy that is deep within our culture. This practice of following truth, this commitment to acting in love and whatever we perceive right now to be the right thing. Whether that means changing radically, changing just a little bit, or staying the course that we are on. We are invited to be true to the world as we perceive it right now. So one such way that is happening in the Unitarian Universalism right now is the 8th principle. A link is given there at the end of your order of service. The 8th principle, if we adopt it, will commit us to, quote, journey towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions. That is accountably to people of color, dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Can I ask a question to the white people in the room? Just for a moment here. Are you editing that in your head? Because I do that. I do that too. Can we agree to honor the leadership of people of color for once? White people have led all this time, have led our country, have led our congregations, have led our association. Clearly, it's not working perfectly. As Ibram Kendi reminds us in the reading that Sally shared, doing the same thing and expecting a different result is insanity. What if we did as Kendi urges us, assessed our methods and leaders and organizations by their results of policy change and equity? How are they doing? What if we dropped our ideology? The things that we were taught that we don't even know, We don't even know how steeped they are in the assumptions of people we shun, people we abhor, people who call themselves proudly white supremacists. What if we dropped any ideology and instead looked at the problems that we want to address, the threats to our ideals of justice, freedom, and equity? What I hear people of color saying, what they've been saying for a very long time, is that we need to address the problems in a different way than we have been doing. What makes this moment promising in Unitarian Universalism is that at this moment, so many white people are listening. And not by coincidence, also happening in this moment in our faith tradition is that there are more people of color among our new ministers, among our seminarians, among our leaders than in any time, certainly in my 20-year career. And many others who've been watching for a long time say, than they can remember ever. One of my mentors in anti-racism says, a person of color herself, says that she works with Unitarian Universalists because of all her communities, it is where she feels the most hope and promise for real change. In my grim moments, I remember those words. I think, I hope she is right. And she knows so much more than I do about what it is like to be a person of color in this beautiful and imperfect and changing faith. So, friends, we have inherited a living tradition. It has changed many times on its way to us. Let us be guided by our pole star of truth and held by love as we seek to move into the future in a way that will honor the best in our tradition. So may it be. Please join in as Bruce leads us in singing Building a New Way.
We can
extinguish our chalice. I extinguish our chalice with just a few more words from Mark Morrison Reed. Alone, our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. So take with you this community, the many years, the millions of people who have contributed to our strength and our vision. They are all here in this flame. It burns in us until we meet again. Please stay after the benediction for our virtual coffee time. You'll be invited to small group conversations in our breakout rooms. If you wish to discuss, the topic of the service, please do stay in the main room here with me. The rooms will stay open for about half an hour. So now please unmute yourself, turn on your video, and help the suffering, rejoice in beauty, speak love with word
and deed.
Honor
all beings. Amen.
Have a lovely day.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,